Enlightenment philosophy hit a hard boundary with Immanuel Kant. He argued that human perception is restricted to a digital-like interface, that the ultimate reality of the universe, the thing in itself, is strictly unknowable. We can only measure the phenomenal world. This is the realm of structured appearances, where objects interact predictably under the strict laws of space and time. Whatever exists behind those appearances, the noumenal void, remains completely inaccessible to human reason. Arthur Schopenhauer bypassed this epistemological wall entirely. His central axiom was that the thing in itself is not a static void. He argued that reality's ultimate substrate is a constant active force. He called this force the will. This is not a human will. It has no goals, no logic, and no moral trajectory. It is a blind, aimless, entirely non-rational striving that animates all matter. In this framework, human intellect does not govern reality. Rational thought is merely a fragile, secondary byproduct, evolved to serve a mechanical, unconscious force. Schopenhauer justified this claim by looking at the only object we experience in two distinct ways: the human body. From the outside, your body is an objective representation. It is a mass of biological matter, strictly bound by the physical laws of cause and effect. But you also experience your body internally. Subjectively, you feel it as a continuous, relentless striving, a sequence of desires, aversions, and raw urges that exist before you even think about them. Schopenhauer extended this dual nature outward. He mapped this internal feeling onto every physical entity, concluding that all matter is simply the physical expression of this universal will. Think of a heavy iron magnet placed under a bed of fine iron filings. The filings bristle and stand perfectly rigid. The arrangement of the metal is the physical representation, but it is dictated entirely by an unseen magnetic pull. The visible matter merely masks the invisible force. Human psychology works the exact same way. Our complex motivations and conscious decisions are simply intellectual rationalizations of this underlying invisible pull. Because we do not author our foundational desires, our sense of free choice is a cognitive illusion superimposed over raw, deterministic striving. If the will is singular and unified, why does the universe appear as a multiplicity of competing objects? The answer lies in the structuring mechanism of human cognition, which Schopenhauer called the principle of sufficient reason. The human mind cannot perceive a unified whole. It processes reality by applying the strict dividing filters of space, time, and causality. Looking at this conceptual diagram, the singular will fractures into isolated entities along spatial axes, the principium individuatinus. Because of this division, the will is structurally set against itself. The isolated shards are forced into violent friction. These newly isolated phenomena exist in finite space. They are structurally forced to compete for the exact same material resources. Nature becomes a perpetual, self-consuming cycle of violence, dictated entirely by this epistemological fracturing. Every force in physics, every biological organism in the food chain, is locked in a zero-sum struggle to seize matter from another. This war of all against all is not a biological accident. It is a strict mathematical consequence of human cognition fragmenting the will into competing individuals. This metaphysical violence maps directly onto human psychology, creating the inevitability of suffering. The structural nature of desire requires an absence. To want something is to experience a lack of it. Schopenhauer defined this lack as a structural deficiency in the human organism. It is functionally identical to physical pain. Satisfying a desire is the mechanism of attainment. Acquiring the object briefly releases the immediate tension of the lack, but attainment carries a fatal structural flaw. It fulfills a single urge, but it does not extinguish the underlying will itself. The raw striving remains, but temporarily lacks a target. This psychological void manifests as crushing, inescapable boredom. Happiness, therefore, is never a positive acquisition. It is strictly a negative state, the temporary cessation of pain before the next desire forms. This oscillation is a deterministic law governing all conscious existence. As long as human consciousness remains tied to the principle of sufficient reason, it is trapped. It swings like a mechanical pendulum between the sharp pain of want and the profound emptiness of boredom. If consciousness is built entirely on endless striving, how can a system like this ever achieve homeostasis? Schopenhauer identified a temporary epistemological bypass mechanism, aesthetic contemplation. This requires a complete cognitive shift. It occurs when you perceive an object so intensely that the dividing filters of space and time, the principle of sufficient reason, are entirely discarded. The viewer is transformed. You cease to be an individual operating in time, becoming instead a pure, will-less subject of knowledge. In this state, individuality, ego, and the biological drive for self-preservation are completely shed. Instead of seeing a specific competing object, you perceive the universal Platonic idea behind it. You observe the essence of the thing, detached from its utility. The internal result is immediate. The pendulum of suffering temporarily stops. But this state has a severe limitation. Only the rare artistic genius possesses the cognitive surplus to sustain this pure perception for any significant length of time. Aesthetic contemplation suspends the friction of existence, but it offers only a temporary voyeuristic reprieve from the mechanical reality of the will. To achieve more than a temporary pause, Schopenhauer turns to the ultimate permanent escape, ascetic resignation. The core mechanism of asceticism is absolute renunciation. It is the complete, voluntary denial of the will to live. The practical requirements are severe. It demands voluntary poverty, absolute chastity, and the deliberate, mechanical starving of all instinctual biological drives. This is a direct internal war against human nature and our inherent cognitive disposition to individuate the world. This leads to a contradiction. What happens when the will turns against and denies itself? The logical conclusion is absolute. If the physical universe is merely the objectification of the will, denying the will must inherently dissolve the representation itself. When the unseen force of the will is finally withdrawn, the entire structural arrangement of reality simply collapses into nothingness. To the ascetic who has achieved this state, the physical universe, with all its galaxies, suns, and endless striving, is reduced to absolute nothingness. True metaphysical freedom is found only in the complete annihilation of individual desire, leaving behind a profound, peaceful, and absolute philosophical void.